The wilder the stories get, the more likely they become. Let's get going. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are random movie facts that'll blow your mind. Born from the pages of Heavy Metal magazine, Heavy Metal the Movie was a sci-fi action fantasy anthology from 1981 that heaped on violence and gore and a lot of cleavage. As the name implies, they also loaded it with heavy metal and rock music, including bands like Black Sabbath and the Blue Oyster Cult, not to mention voice acting from comedians like John Candy and Eugene Levy. Athlete-turned-actor O.J. Simpson is best known today for the true crime saga, focusing on the brutal murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her partner, Ronald Goldman. Approximately a decade earlier, however, Simpson was a hot commodity who was being considered for the role of the Terminator. Yes, before Arnold Schwarzenegger got the job, O.J. Simpson could have been the famous T-800. The movie myth is that Simpson was rejected for being too much of a nice guy, which, if you think about it, is seriously crazy. Did you know that the suspense that grips most of Hollywood around Oscar season wasn't always part of the award presentation? The very first year, winners were announced 3 months ahead of time, and for the next 10 years, newspapers would get the results in time to publish them on the night of the awards. Unfortunately, in 1940, the LA Times got ahead of themselves and published the winners in its evening edition, which everyone could buy and read before the ceremony. As a result, the Academy adopted the sealed envelope strategy the following year, which is still in use today. Have you ever heard that Scream was almost called Scary Movie? I mean, aside from the title of this entry, talk about a title that doesn't scream horror. Wes Craven initially rejected the script twice, wanting to escape the genre, but the name Scary Movie lured him in. Imagine his surprise when, thanks to a Michael Jackson song and a Weinstein whim, it got swapped for Scream. Okay, it sounds terrible now, but Scary Movie could have given the Wayans brothers a run for their money, right? Cool World came out in 1992 and was arguably someone's response to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It blended live action and animation in a sort of dark comedy noir film, in which a cartoon femme fatale comes to life. As a good portion of the plot does revolve around the idea of human and cartoon sex, it clearly wasn't meant for kids to watch. The media is always interested in the world of Bond movies, especially that story that just broke. But one story that sounded unusual at the time was revealed to be correct. This wasn't something you can usually say about the tabloids. When they began reporting on the identity of actress Carolyn Cozy, who appeared as an extra in 1981's For Your Eyes Only with Roger Moore, they stated she was transgender. In the 80s, this was a major deal. The fact that a transgender person might have featured in a 007 film blew readers' minds. The story proved to be far from a myth, and despite being traumatized by the press exposure, Cozy went on to become an important figure in the development of trans rights. We all know that David Fincher's Fight Club contains some hidden material, including a certain, let's call it, peculiar event in which Tyler Durden shows up in single frames of the film. Well, a various coffee chain also has an almost subliminal role in the film. After Fincher moved to LA, it was challenging to find a nice cup of coffee. That is, until Starbucks appeared on the scene. There were far too many for Fincher's liking, so the filmmaker decided to have some fun by including a Starbucks cup in every scene of the film. With Starbucks' permission, of course. Interestingly, the one scene in which the coffee company refused to let them use their name was during a scene that saw a coffee shop destroyed by a piece of art. Crazy, right? Rumor has it that he was fueled by instant noodles and some serious firepower. If Hollywood is to be believed, he had a loaded gun for inspiration and motivation next to his typewriter. So Travis Bickle's on-screen intensity might have actually had a touch of real-life inspiration. And did you know the iconic "You Talking to Me" wasn't even in the script? Robert De Niro improvised it while practicing on the streets, and director Martin Scorsese loved it so much, he kept it in. In 2016, Seth Rogen's Sausage Party pushed the limits of what the adult in adult animation meant, at least as far as mainstream films went. They absolutely laced the movie with profanity, sexuality, and as many lowbrow jokes as you could imagine a movie named Sausage Party might include. The Rocky film franchise nearly ended with Part 4 in the mid-80s, after star Sylvester Stallone squared up to his opponent, Dolph Lundgren. The latter played the intimidating Russian fighter Ivan Drago, and he accidentally put Stallone in the hospital. Lundgren had punched Sly with a force equivalent to a car crash, and the blow made Stallone's heart swell up. This wasn't a crazy story to promote the movie. It actually happened. Are you a fan of Pacific Rim? The Jaeger in question, Gypsy Danger, had its gait modeled on John Wayne's distinctive hip movements, and its design was inspired by the Empire State and Chrysler buildings. Legendary Pictures took a big risk by making 2016's Pacific Rim, since the film didn't have a pre-existing franchise to back it up. And this was prime franchise time in the movie world. Unfortunately, the film didn't fare too well here in the US, but the risk paid off in other parts of the world where it became a major hit. Screenwriter Travis Beacham got the idea for the movie in 2007 while walking along the Santa Monica Pier. Guillermo del Toro teamed up with Beacham to write Pacific Rim's final screenplay, and the jaw-dropping monstrous sea creatures and robots were born. Can you imagine a world without Marty McFly, Biff, Doc's mind-bending inventions, or that iconic Great Scott expression? Believe it or not, that almost happened. Back to the Future, the time-traveling trilogy, was rejected almost 40 times before making it to our screens. Studios found the whole teen and his mom thing too risque. Thankfully, Universal Pictures took a chance on the flux capacitor, and the rest is cinematic history. Ba ba da ba 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 ba. Oh, what a great score. Alvin Silvestri, if I'm correct. One of the most action-packed anime films of the 90s, Ninja Scroll remains one of the most influential adult anime movies of all time. It plays out like a traditional sort of feudal martial arts film, but the animation allows for over-the-top violence and gore, which it never shies away from. Director Tobe Hooper had brought audiences a story of true horror with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the 70s. This notorious movie featured genuine human body parts. The following decade, he was hired to direct Poltergeist, where he would again showcase real bits of human, this time in the shape of bona fide skeletons. No one told the actors, but apart from that, it was all good creepy fun. Real skeletons were reportedly used for budgetary reasons. The casting calls for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man were very challenging. They had to track down the perfect spider. Not the perfect Spider-Man. I'm talking literal spider auditions. Raimi needed the perfect spider for that iconic moment where Peter Parker gets the first radioactive bite. But the spider that most closely resembled Raimi's vision was a Black Widow. Because using a real Black Widow would be, too dangerous, entomologist Steven Kutcher brought in a variety of spiders to audition for Raimi. They eventually found a spider who looked just right for the part. There was only one problem. The spider was the wrong color. The solution? Makeup. Raimi pointed out that he wanted the scene to look as authentic as possible and that CGI would never come close to using an actual fabulous spider in drag. Dan Aykroyd's original script saw the Ghostbusters in a distant future where ghostbusting was an everyday occurrence. Not firehouse heroes, more like exterminators for the everyday, as common as plumbers and paramedics. Our heroes would have been calibrating proton packs in the local Home Depot and cleaning up Slimer's slime after pizza parties. The alternate Ghostbusters never materialized, but one question remains. Would you call them, even if they were more like the friendly neighborhood pest control? This is just gonna be theme songs all night. Few animated movies intended for an adult audience have achieved the fame of Akira, a movie that introduced many in the West to the idea of anime. Released in 1988, it stands as one of the most iconic films of the genre and an incredible intro to Japanese cyberpunk. Studios have been toying with a live-action remake for over 20 years. Disney is the go-to studio for family-friendly fun, right? Well, most of the time it is. Unless you're watching the cartoon classic The Rescuers from 1977. It may feature a story about mice having adventures, but it also featured something else. Something which was pretty X-rated. A crazy story circulated that a topless lady appeared in a sequence very briefly. This turned out to be true, and the studio had to do a major editing job to clean up this much-loved favorite. The Ringwraiths, also known as the Nazgul in Lord of the Rings, represent some of the most dreaded and menacing horrors to come out of Mordor. They are terrifying creatures whose rings have rendered their physical forms to nothing. The only thing you'll hear before they tear you down is a screech that sounds like the monster in every nightmare you've ever had. That dreadful, soul-piercing screech, however, has a far less sinister backstory. When sound tech David Farmer began experimenting with screeches using animal sounds, including those of harbor seals, another sound engineer told him it just sounded like plastic grinding together. Instead of giving up and looking elsewhere, Kramer was inspired. His solution was to go to Target and buy plastic cups and bowls. That's it. He simply scraped the plastic together, and that's what you hear in the movies. We all know who James Bond is, but how did the super spy come to be? Raised by a Scottish father and Swiss mother in both Germany and Switzerland, he had an average but comfortable childhood until tragedy struck at age 11. Losing his parents in a climbing accident, he found a new home with the Oberhausers, shaping the skills that would make him legendary. By 17, his spirit craved service, leading him to a stellar military career. This brilliance caught the eye of MI6, recruiting him at 30, and just like that, the suave secret agent 007 was born, forever thrilling us with his six-pack abs and irresistible charm. This 2008 animated film is part drama, part war film, and part documentary. The filmmaker uses Waltz with Bashir as a sort of tool to dissect his own experiences in the Lebanon War of 1982. It also features interviews with other soldiers and seeks to clarify his own memories of the events. Because it deals with war in an unflinching way, there are haunted depictions of violence and some sex as well. I mean, this sounds like a sick joke, but it was 100% true. In 1978, two men stole the body of the screen icon Charlie Chaplin from his grave in Switzerland. The criminals thought they'd make money from a ransom. However, Chaplin's family didn't play along. Eventually, the men were caught and the little tramp's body was returned to its rightful place. Okay, while I'm still on the subject of Lord of the Rings, get ready to have your minds blown. Did you know that across the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Legolas only says a single 5-word sentence to Frodo? I kid you not. Despite being two of the trilogy's most iconic characters, spending a significant amount of time together and frequently conversing in J.R.R. Tolkien's books, Legolas's only spoken exchange with Frodo takes place during the Fellowship of the Ring, when he agrees to go with the Hobbit on his journey by saying, "And you have my bow." That this is all they say to each other across nearly 12 hours of film content is incredible, and fans couldn't be blamed for questioning the tiny detail. But it's 100% correct. And it even sparked a hilarious fan theory that Frodo had forgotten Legolas's name by the time the Fellowship reunited at the end of the trilogy, given that he never says the elf's name out loud. Robert Ludlum only started writing seriously around the age of 30. Before that, he worked as an actor and theater producer, which significantly influenced his later writing style. In fact, Ludlum didn't publish his first novel, The Scarlatti Inheritance, until 1971, making him a late bloomer in the literary world. While he wrote 3 Bourne novels, he never got to see his creation on the big screen. He passed away in 2001 at the age of 73, while the first film was still in post-production. Richard Linklater's Waking Life was released in 2001 and is a very philosophical look at life, dreams, and, well, existence itself. It's not that the movie contains too much content you might think is inappropriate for children. It's more that it clearly meant the themes and the ideas for adults. A child would just probably be bored. Tom Cruise made a heavily disguised appearance in the movie Tropic Thunder as Les Grossman, but did you know that he also filmed a role in the original Young Guns? Star Emilio Estevez, an old buddy of his who played Billy the Kid, arranged for Cruise to take part. His character doesn't survive very long, and it's very much a blink and you miss it type deal. Cruise went on to make Far and Away in 1992, a movie that, to date, is his only Western. According to The Godfather's director, Francis Ford Coppola, the cat that appeared in Marlon Brando's arms during one of the scenes was a non-scripted addition to the scene. It was just a homeless cat that happened to be wandering around the set. Coppola just figured that the cat would be an excellent addition to the scene and placed the cat in Brando's arms, and it somehow became one of the movie's most iconic scenes. This last-minute addition, however, nearly ruined the scene altogether. When the crew listened back, Brando's lines of dialogue could barely be heard due to the high level of purring picked up by the microphones. The cat's purr can still be heard in the movie to this day. If women didn't have a crush on Viggo Mortensen before Lord of the Rings, his incredible portrayal of Aragorn definitely sealed the deal. Despite initially declining the role, his son's ardent love for Tolkien's work played an important part in his eventual acceptance. A passionate plea of, "Dad, this is the greatest story ever!" proved persuasive, nudging Mortensen to embrace the epic journey that would mesmerize audiences worldwide. Ba-da-bum. Ba-ba-da-bum-bum-bum. Ba-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba. Ba-da-bum. Sorry, it's just gonna be theme songs all night. You asked for this somehow. An early example of some sci-fi horror anime from Japan that preceded the modern trend, the universe of Vampire Hunter D is still popular, but this was the first movie, in 1985, that was based on the novels. As you might expect from some dystopian future monster hunting, the movie is awash in blood with extensive violence throughout. Back in the days before casual sexism was a big deal, you saw some pretty surprising things in family movies. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was one of the more adult-oriented cartoons that came out of Hollywood. It becomes even more adult when you hear that Jessica Rabbit may have flashed the camera. This potentially shocking clip, where you briefly saw up her skirt, has since been removed. The Silence of the Lambs is one of the scariest movies ever made, mainly due to Anthony Hopkins' incredible performance. The movie also boasts one of the most recognizable posters ever created, which shows Clarice's face with her mouth covered by a death's head hawk moth. However, if you look closely, you'll find a little Easter egg on its back. A miniature reproduction of Salvador Dali and Felipe Halsman's Voluptas Mors photograph. The photograph was taken in 1951 and shows 7 women arranged in the shape of a skull. This movie is rich with small details that fans appreciate, including a hint involving Buffalo Bill's whereabouts and the strange collection of things in his house. For example, the drawing in Hannibal's cell of Italy's Duomo portrayed the landmark as seen from the Belvedere, an homage to Buffalo Bill's hometown of Belvedere, Ohio. And if you watch the movie again, take note of all the weird things Bill has lying around. There's even a quilt adorned with Nazi swastikas. His legend lives on, but so do the what-ifs. Sean Connery, the king of charisma, straight up snubbed iconic roles in The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, Jurassic Park, and, if rumors are to be believed, even Blade Runner. Gandalf's wisdom? Pass. T-Rex Whisperer? Pfft, nah. Neo's mentor? Not today. But hey, the man knew his worth, and his perceptive decisions created a legacy far grander than any of the roles he turned down. Sean Connery doesn't have a theme song. It's the Bond theme song again. Back in 1982, Pink Floyd released The Wall, a partially live-action, partially animated music video dramatic movie based around the album of the same name and many of its themes. It's very surreal in nature throughout, and the imagery can get pretty intense. The movie features some weird metaphorical animated sex, sexual violence, and just, regular violence as well. What was the last name ever written by animation king Walt Disney? Well, would you believe it was Kurt Russell? He's known for playing gritty roles such as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, but when he started out, Russell was a young star in Disney movies. It made sense that Uncle Walt would make a note of his name, though the reason he wanted to write it down is unknown. Tarantino expected Kill Bill Volume 1 to live up to his customary brutal stories, so there were plenty of practical effects on the film. See, Tarantino pledged to shoot, quote, the Chinese way, sans artificial effects, stating that although digital effects looked good, it looked like a computer did it. He wanted it to look good and like something from the 1970s. One of the practical effects was filling condoms with fake blood, and according to makeup effects artist Christopher Allen Nelson, more than 450 gallons were used. In fact, Tarantino marked 100 gallons for the House of Blue Leaves scene alone, and it all paid off when Kill Bill Volume 1 received a nomination for Best Special Visual Effects at the 57th British Academy Film Awards. Bill Murray almost landed the role of Batman in the early 80s. Can you even imagine that? It would not have been the same. Director Ivan Reitman initially pitched a Batman film with Murray as the lead, aiming for a blend of action and offbeat humor. However, the project pivoted when Tim Burton took the helm, leading Michael Keaton to claim the iconic role. While Murray never had a chance, we're sure the concept is still tucked away somewhere in Hollywood. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to see Murray as a much much older Batman in some alternate universe one day. I don't know what the theme song for Bill Murray's Batman would sound like. When Rob Zombie makes an animated film, it should go without saying that it's not for kids. The Haunted World of El Superbeasto came out in 2009. It's sort of a horror movie superhero film based on Zombie's comic with an incredible voice cast. The sex is very overt, as is the violence. Well, not that you'd expect anything less from Rob Zombie. When did Star Wars creator George Lucas know that Darth Vader was Luke's father? According to the man himself, he always knew. But was this really the case? There's a myth out there that Lucas only thought of the idea later on. This is supported by early drafts of the screenplay for Empire Strikes Back. So what was supposed to happen in the Skywalker saga? Well, originally, Luke had a whole different father who Vader killed. Of course, this version of events did appear in the official release when Obi-Wan revealed to Luke that Darth Vader murdered his dad. It turned out that he was lying to protect Skywalker against the horrifying truth. I wish I didn't have to tell you about this one, but Disney animators frequently studied live models to improve their animations. They used this approach for the scene in question. However, the live model they used was not a hippo. Instead, Walt Disney hired an obese woman. The animators dressed her up in ballet costumes and a tutu and taped her as she, quote, tripped with lumbering grace over the live-action stage. The goal was to record whatever portions of her body wiggled and quivered so they could make the hippo's body do the same. And I know some of you will already be questioning the line between cruel and comical with this entry, but it gets worse when you realize that, given that it was 1940, there was also a racial motivation. The model was African American, and the animators referred to her in terms that are unacceptable today. In the climax of Sergio Leone's 1966 western The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach's quest for buried gold at Sad Hill Cemetery is blocked by a bridge guarded by two opposing armies. The only option? Demolition. The bridge, built by Spanish Army engineers, was rigged with explosives and intended to be destroyed for the film. However, due to a technical issue, reportedly either a miscommunication or a test explosion, it detonated prematurely. Luckily, the engineers were on hand to rebuild the bridge, which was promptly blown up again. On cue this time. Drawn Together was presented as an animated reality show, sort of like Big Brother, but for some cartoon knockoffs that were inspired by characters like Superman and SpongeBob. It was also very adult-oriented. No surprise then that the movie followed suit and included a lot of sex, nudity, violence, and just weird, perverse stuff that you'll feel ashamed to laugh about. The Godfather has many classic scenes. However, the one that people remember most is the gory horse's head sequence. In it, the character of Jack Woltz wakes up to find his beloved horse decapitated and the head placed between the sheets. This had been done as a warning from the mob. You might think it was a fake prop, but no. The producers got a hold of a genuine horse head. Using an actual head sounds like a myth, but it was in fact true. If you thought you knew everything there was to know about The Exorcist, think again. We found a few bonus facts for you with this one. Did you know the film is based on a true story? The novel by William Peter Blatty was based on the real-life 1949 exorcism of a boy known as Roland Doe. The story made national headlines and piqued Blatty's curiosity, who was a student at Georgetown University at the time. Pig squeals were an essential feature of the movie's sound design, and a lot of Regan's moans and grunts were created by remixing pig squeals. And The Exorcist also became the first horror movie to receive a nomination for Best Picture Oscar. But perhaps the most disturbing fact about the movie was that actor Paul Bateson, who played a hospital technician, was actually a serial killer. He was charged with killing 6 gay men in 1970s New York, and he was released from prison in 2004. Remember that brutal brawl between Edward Norton and Brad Pitt in Fight Club? The one that takes them tumbling down a seemingly endless staircase? Well, prepare to be floored. Director David Fincher, notorious for his exacting standards, reportedly made the stuntman fall down those stairs 12 times to capture the perfect shot. And guess what? He ended up using the very first take. Talk about commitment to the craft. There's a lot going on in Aqua Teen Hunger Force : movie film for theaters. not the least of which is the gang's origin, a slurry of obscene jokes and some of the most absurdly graphic cartoon violence ever. It's an almost surreal journey of nonsense, dark humor, and childish jokes that are great if you're, into that sort of thing. Also, that title is fantastic. The Exorcist caused a lot of controversy when it was released in the 1970s. The subject matter of a possessed child shocked audiences, and the filmmakers were also pretty alarmed. Why was that? Well, because when a random fire damaged the set, it failed to set alight one key item of furniture. This was the bed that the character of Regan lay on, and the place where her head famously turned at a 360-degree angle. Could the forces of evil have spared the bed and sent a chilling message to producers? It would be wrong to assume that the Department of Defense only participates in movies based on real-life military operations. They've also become considerably more receptive to assisting films in the fantasy genre in recent years. After all, when the Army is fighting a race of robot aliens, it typically skirts the murky, unpleasant aspects of battle that more realistic war films may portray. Such was the situation with Michael Bay's massive Transformers franchise. The film's military liaison officer, Lieutenant Colonel Gregory Bishop, described Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen as one of the largest joint projects with the military. In fact, Revenge of the Fallen holds the record for the most military branches featured in one movie. Did you know that Alan Rickman's unforgettable fall in Die Hard wasn't just acting, but a genuine reaction captured on camera? While clinging to Bruce Willis and Bonnie Bedelia, Rickman, as the villainous Hans Gruber, dangled 40 feet above a crash pad. He expected a countdown, but instead, the stunt coordinator cut the rope early at director John McTiernan's direction, capturing Rickman's raw fear and surprise for posterity. This unorthodox approach paid off, injecting genuine emotion into the scene and solidifying Rickman's performance as a cinematic classic. Of all the films on this list, this one seems the most like maybe it should be for kids. It's Batman after all. Kids love Batman. But this is no ordinary Batman. This is based on Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. Go figure. And it's absolutely brutal. It features the sadistic torture of Commissioner Gordon, Batgirl being paralyzed by the Joker, and of course, just a little bat sex. Here's a crazy movie myth that'll make the Silence of the Lambs even freakier. It sounds insane, but the moth cocoon that was placed in a character's throat contained a real moth. How did they achieve this? Was there some sort of moth wrangler on set? Kinda, though glue also played a part. Yes, they glued a moth into someone's mouth. I'm guessing the actor was under strict instructions not to swallow. Back when Will Smith wasn't a Hollywood outcast, he starred in the biggest film of 1996, Independence Day, which was written in only 4 weeks. Whether we think it's the ultimate B-movie or an over-the-top cheese fest, it made a fortune. What many of you probably don't know is that the movie was supported by the US military, which agreed to allow increased access to military installations and to make their soldiers and pilots available for consultation. The Army, however, withdrew its support when they became aware of the numerous references to Area 51 being the center of mysterious alien research. Another interesting fact is that more than 150 Californians called the police to report seeing a UFO after spotting the welcome wagon used in the film. The Godfather gave us several unforgettable moments and quotes. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse, anybody? But what must surely be one of the most badass facts about the movie is that Sonny Corleone's signature catchphrase, bada bing, wasn't scripted. Actor James Caan, drawing inspiration from his acquaintance, real-life mobster Carmine Persico, ad-libbed the phrase to emphasize swift action or closure. How about that? Bada bing. Probably not as cool when I say it. If you've never seen a stop-motion animation horror movie, then The Wolf House is a good place to start. It'll become clear pretty quickly why, it's not for kids. Hell, it just looks creepy even before you know what's going on. Everything on screen has an unsettling darkness to it, like you're watching someone else's nightmare unfold. You may have heard the story that Back to the Future nearly used a time-traveling refrigerator instead of a DeLorean. This story is completely true. The reason Marty McFly didn't climb aboard a household appliance was that, kids might copy him, and the studio didn't want a potential lawsuit filed against them if someone got stuck in a fridge and endangered their lives. Profiting from people's dread of insects has long been a mainstay of the horror genre. Still, few scenes of creepy crawlies have cemented their status in pop cultural imagery quite like the bees that flow out of Tony Todd's mouth in the 1992 horror movie Candyman. The classic film is full of memorable images, from the antagonist's filthy hook to the charred Helen crawling out of the burning pyre. But the scene of Candyman leaning in to kiss Helen with bees writhing around between his lips is one of the most iconic moments in horror cinema. In a bold move not many of us would have been able to pull off, actor Tony Todd, who played Candyman, had live bees placed in his mouth for the movie's notorious scene and ended up being stung almost 30 times. He was paid $1,000 per bee sting and earned $27,000 for the experience. You know that famous portrait drawn in the movie Titanic? Yeah, I'm talking about that one. In the iconic scene, Jack Dawson sketches a nude Rose DeWitt bouqueter. Did you know that the hand wielding the charcoal actually belongs to James Cameron himself, not Leonardo DiCaprio? A skilled artist, Cameron drew the portrait, titled The Heart of the Ocean, to infuse the scene with greater authenticity and personal connection. And in case you were wondering, Kate Winslet wore a bathing suit for reference photos, so the detail in the portrait is nothing more than Cameron's talent and imagination. Bum. I bet you thought I was going with Celine Dion there. No. Paprika was made in 2006 and is a little bit Inception and a little bit detective thriller. It makes heavy use of dream imagery and features a device which allows people to enter dreams and, in this case, do some nefarious things. There's enough surreal imagery to make the sex and violence in the film stand out in a creepy way that most kids, probably don't need to see. Today, sound designers have access to a range of technology that helps them create iconic effects. In the 30s, however, they had to rely on their creativity and ingenuity a lot more. When you hear King Kong roaring in the classic monster movie, the sound is actually that of a tiger and a lion, flipped and playing at a slower speed. E.T. was an incredible hit upon its initial theatrical run, grossing an astonishing $800 million. So it's no surprise that studio bosses wanted a sequel. Melissa Matheson, the original film's writer, began bouncing ideas off of Spielberg, and the pair came up with a much darker story, Nocturnal Fears. The sequel would have kicked off with a pale flesh-eating alien getting stranded on Earth. Sending a distress signal for help, the alien known only as Zrek gets backup from several evil, dagger-wielding aliens. Elliot, E.T.'s friend from the first film, intercepts Zrek's signal and ends up abducted by the evil aliens. When Elliot pleads for help, E.T. sets off on his own brave rescue mission. The project was eventually abandoned, with Spielberg admitting that there was nowhere else for the story to go. However, the narrative was told again decades later in the guise of a Christmas advertisement. Spielberg approved the proposal, advising the ad's director on how to shoot the mini-sequel. I'm not really a fan of old black and white movies, am I not? But if you watched Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, you might be surprised to learn that he didn't just scare the bejeebus out of everyone, he also dared to do something totally unheard of in cinema up to that point. Show a flushing toilet. Shocking, I know. But all sarcasm aside, it actually really was. It simply wasn't done in those days. Hitchcock's seemingly small act was a rebellion against Hollywood's outdated norms. In the process, he brought a gritty touch of realism to Psycho and opened the door for more honest and open filmmaking. Flea holds the unusual distinction of being a documentary, something you rarely see in animation. It tells the story of a man living a secret life, sharing his true story for the first time of how he fled from Afghanistan to start a new life in Denmark. While it's not over the top at all with sex and violence, its themes of war and prejudice hang heavy and make it not something your average kid would want to watch. E.T. wasn't always going to be a cuddly movie character. Director Steven Spielberg originally planned to make a violent aliens versus humans film titled Night Skies. It would have been a contrast to his previous movie, the classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Because Spielberg is associated with family entertainment, the thought of him making a horror movie is a strange one, and sounds like a myth. Incredibly, we might have gotten an E.T. that kicked ass instead of phoning home. He's all out of phones and bubblegum. Wait. Here at List 25, we've proven time and time again that we're not scared of finding the facts that nobody else wants to tell you about. One of the juiciest, no pun intended, we found so far must be the truth about the sound effects behind Woody's horse. You see, superb sound effects can make or break a movie, especially an animated one. Everything must glug or plop in the right way. However, creating the perfect sound for a cartoon can be difficult. Sometimes the sound team must go to unusual lengths to achieve the desired effect. This was especially true for the Toy Story sound team. In their pursuit of the perfect sounds, they left no stone unturned. Or, to be more precise, they left no face unlocked. According to the BBC, to accurately imitate the slobbering slurp Woody's horse gives Woody in the picture, the sound guys took one poor man far down on the artistic ladder and coated his face in peanut butter. They then drove him to a pasture in search of the perfect cow with a peanut butter addiction. The cow cheerfully accepted the challenge and licked the peanut butter from the man's face. The lickathon lasted hours since the sound team needed enough material to create the perfect slurp. Yeah, nailed it. You can have that, Toy Story 5. Usual Suspects. A film dripping with suspense, a labyrinth of twists and turns, and a bit of flatulence. Wait, what? That's right. The director Bryan Singer initially envisioned the lineup scene as a chilling moment of unveiling, but the set erupted in suppressed giggles when Del Toro let out a well-timed, or perhaps poorly timed, gust of wind. Instead of scrapping the scene, Singer saw an opportunity. The shared amusement fit perfectly with the film's themes of hidden alliances and unconventional bonds. He embraced the silliness, even incorporating the scene into the trailer and poster. In 1999, Trey Parker and Matt Stone took South Park to the big screen, and it lived up to the subtitle of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Aside from being the highest grossing animated film ever at the time, it also managed to get into the Guinness Book of World Records for the most profanity ever in an animated film with 399 swear words. The soundtrack is fantastic, those songs are great. When the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, it was different from anything that had been seen before. Many people thought it was a real case, a fact enhanced by the creators pretending their story was real. They went to extreme lengths to maintain the illusion and even listed their performers as deceased on IMDb. So if you're mad at yourself for believing the story, don't worry. They put a lot of effort into fooling people. I don't know about you guys, but I am a massive QT fan. Am I? No, I'm not. Our writer is. I don't like Quentin Tarantino movies. Anyway, for this list, I sure am. Did you know that Tarantino's films are all set in the same realer-than-real universe? From Reservoir Dogs to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, these films are all connected in some way. That's why props from one movie can usually be seen in another. A lot of the characters are even related to one another. For example, Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction is the brother of Victor Vega, Mr. Blonde, in Reservoir Dogs. This universe is meant to be a hyper-exaggerated version of our own, and frequently includes fictitious characters interacting with actual figures from our past. Think Lieutenant Aldo Raine and his interaction with Adolf Hitler in *Inglourious Basterds*. Quentin also created the movie universe, which includes movies like Kill Bill, Natural Born Killers, and From Dusk Till Dawn. These are the movies that the characters from the realer-than-real universe would see if they ever went to the movies. A type of universe within a universe. I'm sorry, I don't like Quentin Tarantino movies. I just don't. Have it out with me in the comments below. This stuff has never gripped me. I'm sorry. Frank Abagnale Jr., portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, led a life straight out of a Hollywood script. Sort of. Even though Abagnale's claims about living as a doctor, pilot, and lawyer continue to be debated, one fact cannot be denied. Audiences loved the movie. But did you know that Abagnale wasn't just the film's subject? He made his very own cameo appearance. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but he played the French police officer who took Leo into custody. Spoilers. Not a traditionally animated film, A Scanner Darkly was filmed with actors and then rotoscoped, a technique to essentially make them into animated characters. It's a noir thriller by Philip K. Dick, the same man who wrote Blade Runner, so there are some similar futuristic themes. While things like sex and violence are present, they're not over the top compared to some of these films, but the pervasive drug use is definitely something not intended for kids. The Conqueror, a John Wayne / Genghis Khan movie from the 1950s, was seen as a cursed production, with a powerful myth circulating that the actors and crew were fatally affected by the events of the shoot. You see, they made the movie in Nevada, a state known for its nuclear testing. The conditions in which The Conqueror was made could be said to have given the stars and filmmakers cancer. The statistics are worrying, with approximately half of those involved in the production becoming sick. Now, I should add that this hasn't been medically proven, and that other factors such as smoking cigarettes have been highlighted as a possible cause. Thanks to its tiny budget and massive success at the box office, George Miller's 1980 film Mad Max scored a return on investment of 24,738%. Miller worked as an emergency department doctor to supplement the film's $350,000 budget, and ended up making $49,675,000 in profit. And did you know that Mel Gibson landed the role after taking a friend to audition? He was actually bloodied and bruised from a confrontation involving half a rugby team when the friend asked him to drop him off. Because the agency was also looking for freaks, they snapped a few candid shots of Gibson, who was simply standing around, and asked him to return after he healed. When he did, Miller offered him the part on the spot. Sigourney Weaver is a vocal anti-smoking advocate who wouldn't touch a cigarette on set. But her character, Dr. Grace Augustine, wouldn't be caught dead, pun intended, oh god, that's a dark pun, without one. So, CGI came to the rescue. Weaver expertly faked the action while the team of digital wizards created the perfect illusion in post-production. Such a good movie. It's my ringtone. For some Western audiences, they may only know Ghost in the Shell as a film that inexplicably starred Scarlett Johansson. But many years earlier, it was a sort of cyberpunk thriller anime that very clearly inspired later films like The Matrix. By all accounts, the Oscar-winning epic Titanic was a nightmare to shoot. It also featured a famous story where the team got high off a funky clam chowder. The ingredients in the meal included the hallucinogen PCP, which drove everyone crazy. While the story is true, we don't know who actually spiked the Hollywood seafood. We loved Pixar's Up so much that we decided to give you more than one fact for this entry. I'll give you another fact at the end of this. Throughout the film, supervising technical director Steve May and his colleagues produced a canopy of 10,297 balloons to float Carl's house. This figure goes up to 20,622 during the dramatic sequence in which the house lifts off its base for the first time. May and his colleagues calculated that it would actually take roughly 26.5 million balloons to lift an actual house. More than 450 children ended up auditioning for the role of Russell. Funnily enough, Jordan Nagai, who plays Russell, had no intention of auditioning for the part. He just went with his brother, an actor with some advertising and TV credits, and was asked to try out while he was there. Over 375 people at Pixar had a hand in bringing Up to our screens, including 70 animators. And now for that bonus fact, it's my least favorite Disney film. I don't like it. I think it's too ADHD. I have ADHD. I think everyone who says they love Up, they just love the first 10 minutes. The rest of the film just feels way too random, and I don't like it. It is my least favorite. If you really want to know, ask me, I'll answer. I don't want this to drag on. I've said it before, but I don't like Up. I don't like Quentin Tarantino. I don't like Up. Man, I'm just a party pooper here. Sorry. I think we can all agree that Oscar winner Christopher Waltz is one of the best actors in Hollywood today. Not one to shy away from controversy, his on-screen characters, just think Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained, often grapple with historical conflicts and prejudice. That's why it might surprise you to learn that he has a son, Leon Waltz, who pursued religious studies and currently serves as a rabbi in London. It just goes to show you really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Anomalisa uses stop-motion animation to tell the story of a man who one day meets what, to him, is the only woman in the world. It's a quirky film made by Charlie Kaufman, and it's at times funny and other times moving, but also quite surreal and bizarre. While it won a number of awards, you can be sure no one suggested kids should be watching it. There's a ridiculous myth concerning Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which focuses on the shocking shower sequence where Marion Crane was brutally murdered by Norman Bates. According to this myth, the special effects team decided to use chocolate instead of blood. Of course, using real blood would have been a bad idea, but how could you possibly substitute it with chocolate? Well, the answer to that question is quite easy. The movie was shot in black and white, so no one noticed the difference in color. Plus, the chocolate syrup was nice and goopy. It Certainly looked convincing on camera. Have you ever heard this fact before? It is absolutely hilarious. A few years ago, Henry Cavill was working on Warner Bros. Justice League and Paramount's Mission Impossible Fallout at the same time. Cavill grew a mustache for the latest Mission Impossible film, and Warner Bros. Scheduled Justice League reshoots during the Mission Impossible filming. Because Paramount refused to allow Henry Cavill to shave his mustache, Warner Bros. Had to spend $25 million digitally removing the mustache for Justice League. The end outcome was so terrible that they might as well have asked a random teen to do it for $50 instead of wasting $25 million. The Harry Potter movies weren't just full of wizards and wands. The producers also included secret cameos from British rock legends. In The Goblet of Fire, the original Weird Sisters were none other than Radiohead's Johnny Greenwood on guitar, Phil Selway on drums, alongside Pulp's Jarvis Cocker on vocals, and Steve Mackey on bass. The Prisoner of Azkaban featured a brief cameo from Ian Brown, frontman of the iconic Manchester band The Stone Roses. He was the wizard performing a bit of coffee conjuring magic at the Leaky Cauldron. The 2007 French film Persepolis is based on a graphic novel, but definitely not in the same vein as some other comic book films. It's a hard-hitting biographical drama about a girl growing up during the Iranian Revolution. There is no slapstick comedy or funny animals here, just the human condition, turmoil, growth, and loss. Would you dare steal from the man with the golden gun? Iconic Bond villain Scaramanga liked to use a gold weapon to assassinate people, but he had to do without it after a thief took it from a public exhibition in 2008. You'd have to be crazy to run away with a dangerous killer's firearm, especially one belonging to a psychopath with 3 nipples. Knick-knack, Tabasco! 7 follows Mills, Brad Pitt, and Somerset, Morgan Freeman, as they investigate a grisly crime that leads them to the discovery of a serial killer. It was a fantastic movie, and we highly recommend you watch it if you haven't seen it before. The hunt for the killer, John Doe, Kevin Spacey, who's responsible for the complex acts of violence based on the 7 deadly sins, takes them all across LA, visiting multiple crime scenes. And even though the film is mostly a mystery drama, one of the action scenes actually resulted in an adjustment for Mills' character. During the unfortunate scene, Mills chases John between buildings in the rainy streets of LA, and he slips from a fire escape and smashes into the ground. From that point on, Mills' arm is in a sling. The severity of his injury, however, was not part of the original script. Pitt's arm went through the windshield of a car while filming the chase sequence, seriously wounding himself. After Pitt had arm surgery, Fincher was forced to reorganize 7 and incorporate the injury into Mills' character. After Ratatouille's 2007 release, pet rat adoption rates soared in the US, Germany, and Sweden. In fact, pet chain Pets at Home reported a 50% increase in sales in the UK. At the same time, animal rights group Rat Planet in Britain warned of potential impulse adoptions later fading, something the facts don't support since numerous online pet shops and rescues still actively cater to pet rats in the UK, indicating continued demand. Though the exact number of Remy-inspired rat owners remains unknown, experts estimate a significant rise thanks solely to the film's portrayal of these intelligent animals. And the same thing happened with pugs after Men in Black. Although I think that one was a little more sad. I think there were a lot more returns. There's a lot of impulse buying when it comes to animals and movies. So don't just get your child or buy yourself an animal just because you saw it in a movie. Make sure you can have and afford an animal first. Don't impulse buy another living being. People like to name drop George Orwell a lot these days, especially online, but it's usually in reference to his book 1984. But his other famous novel, Animal Farm, is also well known, and in 1954 got the full animation treatment. At first glance, one might think it's a kids' movie with its colorful cast of critters, but it's squarely aimed at heavy political themes at adults. There was a dark side to The Wizard of Oz, including a surprising controversy involving a paycheck for a dog. The canine character Toto, played by Terry the Terrier, received a generous week's salary of $125. Compare that to the amount paid to the Munchkins, and you're looking at a potential workplace argument. No wonder that little dog was so perky. Who will ever forget that moment in the first Jurassic Park when the water starts rippling along with the T-Rex's steps? Spielberg enlisted the help of animatronics expert Sam Winston to manage the production, having admired his earlier work on the extraterrestrial queen from Aliens. The metal and wood framework of the monster was coated in layers of chicken wire, sculpted clay, and fiberglass, a process that took months of hard work. Warner Brothers even strengthened the film stage to accommodate the 6-ton monster. These endeavors were nearly undone, however, when Spielberg chose to film the T-Rex's first scenes in the rain. The T-Rex quickly went from a beautifully tuned machine that worked fantastically to a jittering mess that had absorbed too much water and couldn't be counted on. Workers had to hand-dry the 18-foot lizard with towels and blowers between takes. If the squad didn't act quickly enough, the mechanical beast would shake uncontrollably. According to Kathleen Kennedy, the film's producers, people would be taking a break, eating lunch, and the T-Rex would magically come alive. It made for a lot of fun. And screams. While The Wizard of Oz's Munchkins charmed audiences with their song and dance, Terry, the canine behind Toto, wagged his way to a richer paycheck. At $125 a week, he out-earned a lot of his human co-stars. According to the records, the actors who portrayed the Munchkins only earned around $50 per week. While some Munchkins had speaking roles and sang, others appeared only in background shots. Therefore, the figures varied, but never exceeded $100. Was it discrimination, sizeism, or just the way of Hollywood back then? You tell me. From Japan comes Perfect Blue, a psychological thriller made in 1997. It uses many of the familiar tropes from other such thrillers. The only difference is this one is all animated. The result is the story of a famous singer slowly going mad as she's stalked by a crazed fan. The movie features amped up violence and a very uncomfortable sexual assault scene. Because, the other ones are not uncomfortable? I guess excessively uncomfortable. The long-running Alien franchise continues to this day, but it's easy to overlook just how shocking the original was when it was released in 1979. The unfortunate character of Kane became the very first victim of the chestburster, suffering a gruesome fate after going from indigestion to violent death. Kane was played by the late great John Hurt, and he and director Ridley Scott shared a secret that they kept hidden from the cast. What was the secret? Well, his fellow actors didn't know they were going to be showered in blood and guts. They look shocked because they actually are shocked. I never realized that shooting Jaws was such a nightmare. Overworked crew members would come to shore burnt and salt splattered. Technical difficulties plagued the mechanical sharks. The one even sank, necessitating a deep-sea rescue mission. Sea salt crept into the delicate inner workings of the animatronics, causing the pneumatic hoses to malfunction. One of the actors was nearly decimated by propeller blades. In the end, production was 3 months behind schedule, and the budget nearly tripled. It's no surprise then that the film's crew unofficially called it flaws. After failing to complete the movie on schedule, Spielberg heard rumors that his directing career was over. He persisted, coming up with ever more inventive ways to shoot scenes without his robotic monstrosities. He called them turds. That's why some parts of the movie only allude to a shark. The team's efforts were ultimately rewarded. The film was the highest-grossing title of its time and made $500 million worldwide. In the realm of cinematic profits, one Hollywood blockbuster reigns supreme. It wasn't a CGI-based action movie or a Middle-earth fantasy, but a low-budget ghost story, Paranormal Activity. Made for a mere $100,000, combining production and estimated marketing, this found-footage phenomenon haunted its way to a monstrous $89 million box office haul, shattering records with a 19,758% return on investment. That is absolutely insane. To put it into perspective, the second most profitable horror film, The Gallows, pales with a mere 6,843% ROI. In 1973, the mostly animated, with a dash of live action, movie Heavy Traffic was edited down in order to receive an R rating. These days you'll hear of a director editing an R rating down to PG-13 maybe, but rarely does this more extreme case occur. And it didn't work either. They gave the movie an X rating, although today that mostly just means R. The film is about an underground cartoonist and the people who inspire him. It also features a heck of a lot of cartoon nudity, violence, ethnic slurs, and enough cussing to do South Park proud. When dodging an asteroid belt in Return of the Jedi, the heroes of Star Wars were dealing with more than just chunks of rock. If you think you saw a sneaker heading toward them in the depths of space, then don't worry, you were not hallucinating. This was a real shoe thrown in by one of the visual effects artists. Did you know that Martin Scorsese's epic, Oscar-nominated masterwork on greed, The Wolf of Wall Street, was made with stolen money? Well, you do now. The film's production firm Red Granite Pictures was involved in the 1MDB scandal in 2015 when the producer stole money from the One Malaysia Development Berhad Sovereign Wealth Fund to cover the film's $100 million budget. Yes, people, The Wolf of Wall Street was effectively used to launder money. Red Granite ultimately paid the US government $60 million to settle the matter. At the same time, the film's main character, Jordan Belfort, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, also sued the company for $300 million. It truly gives new meaning to the word irony. A Clockwork Orange's iconic violence wasn't just on screen. Malcolm McDowell, playing Alex, also faced very real physical challenges. Apart from cracked ribs, he also ended up with a scratched cornea and temporary blindness. During the Ludovico technique, the disturbed fictional therapy scene fueled by Beethoven and flashing disturbing images, McDowell was required to keep his eyes pinned open under bright lights. Director Stanley Kubrick, known for his demanding perfectionism, promised a quick shoot of about 10 minutes, but the scene ended up lasting several hours. Apart from the temporary blindness, McDowell was also left physically and emotionally drained from the intense process. Perhaps the most of all the adult-oriented cartoons ever made, Fritz the Cat was produced in 1972, with a sequel that followed up in 1974. It's part political satire, but also part shock comedy, and features more than its fair share of oddly graphic, anthropomorphic animal sex, a race riot, and all the cartoon cat swearing you could hope for. The sequel even managed to include Adolf Hitler. Legendary movie director Stanley Kubrick was a trailblazer in the world of film. Did he like to share his secrets? Not really, as the making of his late 1960s sci-fi epic 2001 reveals. Kubrick wanted to virtually obliterate traces of the props and models used in the movie to stop them appearing in other productions. He ensured these were disposed of, meaning you can't get a hold of any collector's items from the shoot, no matter how determined you are. We specifically left this item on today's list to fill our number one spot, because, well, we're feeling a bit nostalgic. We all know that Robin Williams had the time of his life while doing the voice for the genie in Disney's Aladdin. But did you know that directors Ron Clements and John Musker wanted Robin Williams to play the genie so badly that they literally wrote the part specifically for him? They even animated lines from one of his earlier comedy albums, as if the genie were performing them, to persuade Williams to take the role. The genie's supervising animator Eric Goldberg commented that the character perfectly embodied Robin Williams. In fact, Williams took the script and ran with it, often going off script. Following the passing of Robin Williams in 2014, Goldberg tearfully recalled his relationship with Williams during the film, stating, "He was a real-life genie, and boy, did he grant our wishes." Can you imagine Gone with the Wind without its iconic closing line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn"? The cinematic gem almost faced the chopping block because of its unconventional wording. The then strict self-regulation rules, known as the Hays Code, considered it offensive. Producer David O. Selznick faced a dilemma: tone it down or gamble with the censors. Hilarious alternatives arose like, "I don't give a hoot" or "I don't give a straw." But Selznick recognized the line's power. He saw it not as vulgarity, but as reflecting Rhett's blunt frustration in the book. While other parts of the adaptation needed adjustments, including toning down swear words, Selznick knew this line was untouchable, and his gamble paid off. "Frankly, my dear" became the stuff of legend.